and welcome back to my channel. Today we are going to be talking about the CISSUS Discolor. Before we get into the care of this beautiful plant, I just want to say, if you are new here and you don't know me already, my name is Emma and I make houseplanting content all over the internet. So if you want to follow along with my houseplanting journey and learn something along the way, stick around, watch some more of my videos, and subscribe to my channel. If you're not new, thanks for being here. Right, let's talk about the CISSUS Discolor. CISSUS Discolor are commonly known as tapestry vines or Rex Begonia vines. They're called Rex Begonia vines because they look very similar to Rex Begonias, these plants right here. They are actually, though, not at all related to Rex Begonias or Begonias at all. They are more closely related to grapes and grapevines. They are known for their very striking, long, super dark, greeny purple leaves with bright silver splashes on them, as well as like really bright red backs to their leaves. Like, look at that color. It is gorgeous. Love this one. I'd say they're probably about a medium level plant. They're definitely not the easiest. This is actually my second version of CISSUS Discolor. My first one did end up dying. They can be quite fragile because their leaves are actually really quite thin, and so they get damaged really easily. So you do kind of have to be a little bit careful with this plant, and it can be a little bit finicky, but once you sort of get a good idea on the care, they will grow like crazy. Like most other tropical plants, CISSUS Discolor really likes bright indirect light. They don't want to get too much sun, especially long hours of hot sun in sort of the midday when the sun is like really fiercely beating on the leaves. It can cause them to burn, and because they are so thin and fragile, they burn quite easily. They can, however, tolerate sort of dappled sunshine, so if you've got a tree and the sun comes through the tree and it's getting like little spots of sunshine, and that's okay. Or if it's getting like maybe an hour or two in the early morning or late afternoon, that's fine. But sort of prolonged periods of bright sun should be avoided. So like maybe an east or west facing window would be really good. My windows are southwest facing, so they get light most of the day, so I probably wouldn't put this in a window in my home. I have mine underneath a grow light actually. It doesn't really get much natural light. The windows are sort of recessed and it's kind of in an alcove, and so the grow light is basically the only thing that's keeping this one going at the minute. But those grow lights are on for I think about 12 hours a day at this point because it's such a dark corner. So you do have options with these. It doesn't have to be bright, natural, indirect sunlight all the time. You can go for a more grow light sort of option if that is something available to you. It's also really important to note that the brighter light it is getting, the deeper and richer the colors on its leaves will be. They will be brighter as well. If you're noticing that your plant is starting to look a little bit anemic and pale, it's probably a sign that you should put your plant in a bit of a brighter spot or increase the light in the spot it's in to kind of more suit its needs. CISSUS Discolor are a little bit finicky when it comes to water. They do not like to dry out too much or sit for prolonged periods dry. I think that's one of the issues I had with my first one. I am somewhat of a chronic underwaterer. I'd much rather underwater than overwater, but this one was really hard, actually impossible originally to bring back in my first instance from underwatering. And so it is really important to pay attention to the soil dryness when watering this plant. I tend to water when the soil is dry about 50 to 75% of the way down the pot, and I just checked that using my finger or a moisture meter. For me, at this point in the year, which is early autumn, it is about once a week, but it does fluctuate depending on the weather and the heat in our home and stuff like that. So going into the deep dark depths of winter, I will probably start watering less and less up until probably about March when it starts getting brighter again. So it is good to pay attention to the soil dryness rather than a time-based schedule, because if you're saying, okay, I'm gonna water it once a week, you could end up overwatering your plant, which is really bad for them and probably will kill your plant because of root rot. So it's always best to keep away from that sort of time-based schedule. CISSUS Discolors like it warm. Their ideal is between 21 and 27 degrees Celsius, which is 70 to 80 Fahrenheit, which is quite warm, a lot warmer than many of the other tropical plants I have in my collection. It's on the warmer end of that scale. They do not tolerate cold well. They can handle a little bit lower than that, but not for extended periods of time. And if it gets anywhere below 10 degrees Celsius or 50 Fahrenheit, your plant can suffer cold damage, so that should be avoided if at all possible. I personally used to have mine in my Millsbell cabinet, which was keeping a pretty warm temperature most of the time, at least 21 degrees for the majority of its life. It has since outgrown that, and it's just staying in my flat, which I personally like to keep about 20 degrees or higher, but obviously as energy prices rise, that's going to be a little bit harder. So I'm hoping that this one fares well over the winter, and if I need to cut it up and put it back in a cabinet, I might do that. But for now, I'm going to see how it lasts in like just the outside atmosphere of my home, which is almost always 20, but sometimes it dips below, especially if it's gonna get really cold this winter. They do love a bit of humidity. Their ideal is like 60% or higher, which is higher than the average household. So if your home isn't over 60%, then you can supplement humidity by grouping plants together, putting it on a pebble tray, or getting a humidifier or something. When I used to have mine in the cabinet, this whole thing was generally like 70 to 80% humidity, but now that it's out of the cabinet, it's in my like sort of average home humidity, which is usually at least 50 or 60%. I tend to have a pretty humid home, probably due to the inordinate number of plants that I own. I personally fertilize my CISSUS Discolor about every other water, which at the minute is about every other week, but it'll slow down to maybe once a month going into the autumn and winter. You can actually stop fertilizing, and you probably should stop fertilizing in the autumn and winter if your plant stops growing. They can go into a bit of a dormancy period over the cooler months, and so if they do that, you do not want to be feeding them because they're not going to be able to absorb that nutrients because they're not actively growing, and it could cause like root burn and stuff like that. So try and avoid that if possible. If your plant is still growing, you can continue to fertilize it throughout the winter and it should be okay, especially if you live in a home where you're creating an artificial environment for your plants. They will be perfectly fine continuing to get fed. I use liquid gold leaf at the normal full ratio because it is a specific houseplant fertilizer. If you're using a more all-purpose fertilizer, I would suggest diluting it to half strength and maybe even fertilizing even less, like every 3 or 4 waters, because they can be quite strong if they're not specifically for houseplants. A rich moisture holding soil is really important for CISSUS Discolor because they really like to stay quite moist. However, it does still need drainage. You can't just have an entirely like coir or peat-based soil because that will be too heavy for your plant. If you just have average potting mix, I was just adding perlite in there to add some extra drainage in, and that should be fine for your plant. But drainage is necessary because if it's sitting in water or the soil is too dense and heavy, it can cause the roots to rot and your plant will die. You'll probably need to repot your plant every year or 2, depending on how old it is. I've repotted this one, I think, once or twice. And the way you would know is by checking the bottom of the pot. And if there's roots coming out of the drainage holes, then you know it's probably time for a repot. I did repot this one not too long ago, so I definitely don't think it's time yet. But when you do repot, you want to make sure that you are giving it a pot with drainage holes because that is how the water is going to escape when you're watering it, and you want that to happen. So you can let your CISSUS Discolor trail down and it'll be perfectly happy like that, but they are natural climbers. They will like some sort of trellis or pole as a support. I don't think they need a moss pole because they're not putting out arrow roots to go into something. They're not looking for more nutrients from that. They're just looking to climb themselves up closer to light. So they put out these little tendril things at every node, and the little hands reach out and grab things and cling on to things, and so they will just like automatically look for something to grow. When I didn't have this one on this pole, it would just vine around my other plants and hold on to those for support instead, because it just really wants something to hold on to. It is also super easy to propagate this plant. A really good time to do that is if you are pruning it. So since mine is getting to the top of the pole, I might be pruning it soon and propagating those cuttings. The best way to take cuttings is with a clean pair of scissors and cut just below a node, because that is where the new roots are going to grow from. And once you've done that, put it in your propagation medium of choice. I've propagated them in sphagnum moss before, but you can do it in water or just straight back into soil if that's your preferred method. I probably would use sphagnum moss again because I really like using it for plants like this, and I find that they can live quite a long time just in the sphagnum moss as well. So I like that medium, but it's really up to you. And then once the roots are long enough, I'd say probably if you've just got a single cutting, maybe like an inch or two, maybe a little bit more, you can pot it back up into some soil, and then you have a new plant or a fuller plant. It's great. Another really great thing about the CISSUS Discolor is that it is non-toxic to both humans and animals, meaning cats, dogs, other pets. They could all consume this plant without getting ill, which is really good. I mean, ideally, you still don't want your kids and pets eating your plants, as it's probably not the healthiest for their digestive systems in general, but it will not harm them, and you wouldn't need to worry about taking anyone to the hospital or the vet or anything if they have consumed this plant, which is brilliant. So that is it. That is everything you'll need to know about how to grow your CISSUS Discolor indoors. I really hope that this video helped. If you enjoyed it, please give it a thumbs up down below and leave a comment on other houseplants you'd like me to talk about in the future, and subscribe for more. Thank you so much for watching, and I will see you next time. Bye!